This is not a story whispered around campfires and embellished over generations. This is a documented historical event that happened to real people in a specific place and time, which makes it either the most compelling evidence of the paranormal in American history or the most elaborate hoax ever perpetrated on a frontier community. In the summer of 1817, John Bell encountered a strange animal in his cornfield, something he described as having the body of a dog but the head of a rabbit. He shot at it, but the creature vanished. That same evening, the family began hearing unexplained knocking sounds on the exterior walls of their cabin. At first, the family tried to ignore the noises, believing them to be natural phenomena, perhaps animals or settling wood. But the sounds grew louder and more persistent. Within weeks, they were hearing sounds inside the house, scratching, gnawing, and the noise of chains being dragged across floors. The children began complaining that something was pulling their hair and blankets during the night. They would wake up with welts and bruises, as if they had been pinched or slapped by invisible hands. John Bell, a practical man and a church leader, was deeply troubled by these events, but initially kept them private, fearing ridicule from his community. However, the phenomena intensified to the point where he could no longer hide what was happening. The entity began making sounds that resembled weak whistling, then progressed to whispers and finally to a clear, distinct voice, though no visible source could be found. It would quote scripture, sing hymns, and engage in theological debates with visitors. It demonstrated knowledge it should not have possessed, revealing secrets and private information about people it encountered. The voice identified itself by various names over the years, but became known as Kate Batses, which eventually shortened to Kate, or the Bell Witch. Kate Batts was a neighbor with whom John Bell had a land dispute, and the entity seemed to harbor particular hatred toward John Bell himself. The Bell Witch was not a subtle haunting. The phenomena were physical, aggressive, and witnessed by multiple people simultaneously. The entity focused much of its violence on John Bell and his daughter Betsy. John would experience sudden episodes where his tongue would swell, his jaw would lock, and he would be unable to eat or speak for hours. The entity would laugh during these attacks, sometimes saying, "Old Jack is fixed now." Betsy suffered even worse. Invisible hands would slap her face so hard that witnesses saw her cheeks redden with handprints. Her hair was pulled with such violence that she would scream in pain. She was pinched, scratched, and pushed by forces no one could see. These attacks often occurred in front of multiple witnesses, including her parents, siblings, neighbors, and church members. The entity could speak in multiple voices, sometimes as a whisper, sometimes loud enough to be heard throughout the house and even outside. It would hold conversations with visitors, often displaying knowledge it should not have possessed. It quoted long passages of scripture from memory. It would sing hymns in perfect harmony with church services. It knew intimate details about people's lives, secrets they had never shared with anyone. The voice could be crude and vulgar, using language that shocked the religious Bell family. It would curse, tell dirty jokes, and make inappropriate comments. But it could also be refined and intellectual, discussing theology and philosophy with educated visitors. Witnesses reported seeing objects move without physical cause. Furniture would slide across floors. Dishes would fly off tables. Bed covers would be yanked away from sleeping family members. In one famous incident, the entity made fruit appear out of thin air, presenting fresh grapes, bananas, and other exotic fruits to visitors, items that were not available in rural Tennessee at that time. The witnesses ate the fruit and confirmed it was real and fresh. What separates the Bell Witch from typical ghost stories is the number of credible witnesses. Over 4 years, hundreds of people experienced the phenomena directly. These were not gullible or superstitious people. They included church leaders, educated professionals, and skeptical investigators who came specifically to expose a hoax. No one ever successfully explained the phenomena as fraud or deception. The attacks on Betsy were too violent and too public. The voice was too knowledgeable and too consistent. The physical manifestations were witnessed by too many people simultaneously. Andrew Jackson's visit. One of the most famous episodes involves Andrew Jackson, future President of the United States, who was a friend of John Bell's from their military service together. According to accounts written by members of Jackson's party, the general traveled to the Bell farm with a group of men, some of whom were openly skeptical and claimed they would expose the witch as a fraud. As their wagon approached the Bell property, it suddenly stopped. The horses strained and pulled, but the wagon would not move, as if the wheels were frozen in place. The men examined the wheels and found nothing wrong. They whipped the horses, but the wagon remained immobile. Then a voice spoke from the air, saying something to the effect of, "All right, General, let the wagon move on. I will see you again tonight." The wagon immediately rolled forward, as if released from invisible grip. That night, while the men stayed at the Bell home, the entity tormented one of the skeptics who had claimed to be a witch layer, someone who could banish spirits. The man was slapped, scratched, and terrified until he fled the house in panic. According to the accounts, Andrew Jackson declared, "I would rather fight the British in New Orleans than deal with the Bell Witch." He and his party left the next morning, though some members of his group stayed longer to investigate further. Some historians question whether Jackson actually visited the Bell farm, as his own papers do not mention it. However, multiple independent accounts from people who claimed to be present describe the visit in detail, and the story was widely circulated during Jackson's lifetime without being disputed by him. The death of John Bell. As the haunting continued, John Bell's health deteriorated dramatically. The episodes where his tongue swelled and his jaw locked became more frequent and more severe. He developed a facial twitch and had difficulty walking. By late 1820, he was confined to his bed, growing weaker each day. The entity expressed satisfaction at his condition, repeatedly saying that it would kill him. On December 19th, 1820, John Bell fell into a stupor from which he could not be awakened. The family found a small vial containing a dark liquid in the medicine cabinet, a bottle no one recognized. They asked the entity about it, and the voice replied that it had given John Bell that medicine during the night, and he would never get up from his bed. To test the liquid, they gave a small amount to the family cat. The cat died almost immediately. They threw the vial into the fireplace, where it burned with a bright blue flame. John Bell died the next morning, December 20th, 1820. During his funeral, the entity sang bawdy songs and laughed, to the horror of the mourners. The death of John Bell is what elevates the Bell Witch legend to unique status in American folklore. This is the only case in American history where a death was officially attributed to supernatural causes in court and community records. The entity's departure and return. After John Bell's death, the entity's activity decreased dramatically. It continued to torment Betsy for several more months, particularly regarding her engagement to a young man named Joshua Gardner. The entity violently opposed this relationship, threatening Betsy constantly whenever Joshua was near. Finally, under intense pressure from the haunting, Betsy broke off her engagement. Shortly afterward, the entity announced it would leave. In 1821, the voice told Lucy Bell that it was departing but would return in 7 years. It left with the sound of something rolling down the chimney and out of the house. True to its word, in 1828, the entity briefly returned. It visited the Bell home, spoke with Lucy and some of the sons, and made predictions about future events, including the Civil War and World Wars. After 2 weeks, it departed again, saying it would return in 107 years, which would have been 1935. There is no reliable documentation of any return in 1935, though the legend persists that the entity never truly left the area. Rational explanations and skepticism. Despite the extensive witness testimony, skeptics have proposed various explanations for the Bell Witch phenomena. Theory 1. Mass hysteria and suggestion. Some psychologists suggest the events were a case of mass hysteria combined with suggestion. In isolated frontier communities, belief in the supernatural was strong, and fear could spread rapidly. Once people expected to experience something, their minds could interpret ordinary events as supernatural. Strengths. Explains why phenomena occurred primarily when multiple witnesses were present and expecting them. Weaknesses. does not explain the physical violence against Betsy witnessed by skeptical observers, the movement of objects, or the detailed knowledge the voice possessed. Theory 2. Poltergeist activity centered on Betsy. Parapsychologists note that Betsy was an adolescent girl during the height of the activity, a demographic frequently associated with poltergeist phenomena. Some researchers suggest she unconsciously generated the phenomena through psychokinetic abilities triggered by stress or hormonal changes. Strengths. Explains why Betsy was the primary target and why activity decreased after her engagement ended and she entered adulthood. Weaknesses. Does not explain the intelligent voice, the specific knowledge it possessed, or why phenomena occurred far from Betsy's presence. Theory 3. Elaborate fraud by Betsy or family members. Some skeptics argue the entire haunting was an elaborate hoax perpetrated by Betsy Bell or other family members, possibly to avoid an unwanted marriage or to gain attention. Strengths. Would explain the focus on Betsy and the timing of events. Weaknesses. Does not explain how the fraud was never exposed despite hundreds of witnesses over 4 years, including investigators specifically looking for deception. The physical attacks on Betsy were too violent and public to be self-inflicted. The voice's knowledge exceeded what the family could have known. Theory 4. Poisoning and natural causes. Some medical historians suggest John Bell suffered from a neurological condition that caused his symptoms, and the family attributed natural phenomena to supernatural causes. Weaknesses. Does not explain the 4 years of phenomena before his illness, the attacks on Betsy, the voice, or the hundreds of witnesses to inexplicable events. The legacy. The Bell Witch legend has become deeply embedded in American folklore and Tennessee history. The site of the Bell Farm is now a tourist attraction, complete with a cave that is allegedly haunted by the entity. The story has inspired countless books, films, and investigations. Paranormal researchers consider it one of the most important cases in the field because of the extensive documentation and multiple witnesses. The Tennessee State Historical Commission has placed a marker near the Bell home site, and the Robertson County Archives maintain documents related to the case. Whether the Bell, which was a genuine supernatural entity, a psychological phenomenon, or an elaborate fraud, may never be conclusively determined. What we know for certain is that something extraordinary happened to the Bell family between 1817 and 1821, something that hundreds of credible witnesses experienced and documented. The case raises profound questions about the nature of reality, the limits of rational explanation, and the power of belief. It reminds us that even in the age of reason and science, some events resist easy categorization. The Bell, which remains America's most famous haunting, a case that defies easy dismissal because of its extensive documentation and numerous credible witnesses. Was it a genuine supernatural entity? A psychological phenomenon? An elaborate hoax that fooled hundreds of people? Or something else entirely? Something that our current understanding of reality cannot quite explain? The answer may depend less on the evidence and more on what we are willing to accept as possible. If you are fascinated by America's most mysterious paranormal case, subscribe for more deep dives into the unexplained events that shaped our history. Until next time, keep questioning what you think you know about reality.